Welcome into the On3 studios here in Nashville, Tennessee. It is Monday morning. We're ready for another loaded episode of the Inside Scoop. Why? Because the dead period is finally over today. The contact period opens back up, which means campus visits are back. Your favorite team's program is working hard this week to get their top targets on campus. This is really just the start of the spring recruiting season, which takes us to summer recruiting season, which takes us into the fall, which takes us to signing day. But we are back. Today is Monday. Visits are happening, which means commitments come soon. And we know what comes after commitments: flips. That's right. So we're going to get to it. And this weekend, there was over 100 top prospects in the Sunshine State. They made their way to South Florida to take part in the Miami stop of the Under Armour Next Series. This is the combine that kind of goes all over the country. They've been to Orlando. They've been to Atlanta. They're going to make their way to Texas. They're going to go all over the country. But this weekend, Under Armour Camp was in Miami, the third event of the year. And we got a chance to evaluate hundreds of prospects in person. As Charles Power, Director of Evaluating and Scouting for On3, was on hand at Ives Estate Park. And here are his top performers on the day. Now, I'm going to hit on about 5 of them. You see the list here. You guys can go check out his article. It's up on on3.com right now. And we'll start at the top with wide receiver Cortez Mills, who earned On3 overall MVP. He's a top 300 pass catcher who put on a masterclass in front of Charles Powers. Just excellent route running, excellent hands, excellent technical ability throughout the course of the day. He was consistent, and we saw him break 2 different defensive backs' ankles in one-on-ones. He was just amazing, and he's also one of the most productive high school wide receivers in this 2025 cycle. Last year, he caught 79 passes for over 1,600 yards and 18 touchdowns, leading Homestead High School to a state title appearance. Now, he's ranked 153 overall and has official visits scheduled to Clemson, Florida, Nebraska, and Miami. I'm going to talk with Chad Simmons here in a minute more about Mills from a recruiting standpoint, so hold tight for that. Up next, defensive lineman Floyd Boucard. Now, he's a native Canadian who played in Mobile Christian last year in Alabama. He is now this year going to play his senior season at Miami Central, so he is now a Floridian via Canada, which a lot of Floridians are via Canada, so he'll fit right in down there in the Sunshine State. According to Power, though, Boucard was on a mission on Sunday. He was the top performer among the linemen on the day, had a number of impressive wins in OL, DL one-on-ones, but overall, just violent and quick. Love that for a defensive lineman. Now, it's early in his recruitment, but he has visits set for Oklahoma, Michigan State, and Louisville. I expect more teams to jump on board there. Next up, wide receiver Joshua Moore out of West Broward High School. He goes 6'3", 200 pounds. Excellent change of direction and burst within his routes. That was notable. He also flashed solid ball skills. We saw Moore come away with a couple of nice wins during one-on-ones. Just did a great job of using his frame and physicality. Ton of upside with Joshua Moore. All right. Running back Derek Cooper, the only 2026 prospect that crept into the top 5 in top performers. He's from Chaminade-Madonna High School. You guys know where that is. That's where Jeremiah Smith goes to school. JoJo Trader and Zaquan Patterson last year. This year, they have Chris Ewal, one of the top corners in the country. But next year, it's Derek Cooper time. 6'1", 190. More than passes the eye test, looking to be a solid 6-foot prospect by the time he hits his senior year. Cooper, he was outstanding in drills, caught the ball really well, which is something you have to do in this combine setting if you're a running back. Just very natural with his hands, a natural running back at this point with a ton of upside. All right, number 5. Cornerback Ben Hanks, he's out of Miami Booker T High School, and he's a DB that stood out with a strong one-on-one session. He goes 6'1", 150, excellent length, excellent size. Charles Power also liked the awareness he showed. Hanks has set some official visits. Florida, Georgia, and Miami, those are going to be June officials. Now, I think watch what happens in the spring. He's going to probably take some visits in-state, maybe Florida State. I'm sure he'll be back down at Miami, but the Hanks recruitment is just heating up. So that's the top 5. Go read Charles Power's complete rundown on the top performers from Sunday's event. It was down in Miami, a lot of great prospects there. All right, now we have a big show for you today. We have Chad Simmons on to talk recruiting intel. More about some of the intel from Under Armour, but more in terms of where these guys are going. Then we're going to have Tim Watts on to talk about Bama recent developments. They had a big flip over the weekend. And then we'll bring Chad Simmons back on. He's got some five-star scoop on Caleb Cunningham, DJ Pickett, David Sanders, and Elijah Griffin. Like I said, big Monday. Let's get to it. In this video, I got Chad Simmons, Director of Recruiting for On3, and we're here to talk about the recent major developments with a few elite prospects. With the dead period ending today, it's time to catch on some of the most important names of the 2025 cycle. Chad on top of the news all the time, so let's bring him in right now. Chad Simmons. Quarterback Mattzers. We've talked a lot about him on this show. He's from Pennsylvania, and he goes 6'3.5", 200 pounds. Could be ready to make a decision soon. What are you hearing, or what is he telling you about his timeline?
Yeah, he's being, I think, pretty open, pretty transparent, Josh. Obviously, his number one focus right now is go finish basketball. I think they're deep in the playoffs, and however long they go, he'll play that and leave that to be his focus. But as soon as that's over, he's going to hop on the phone, him and his family, try to lock in dates this month in March to get to his Final Four, which are Georgia, Missouri, Penn State, and Pittsburgh for a spring practice. And he'd like to decide, if not by the end of March, early in April. So I think a month or so from now, he'll be putting his name on that commitment list.
Now, Penn State is shown as the team that's trending on the recruiting prediction machine, but Georgia's making him a priority. Is Penn State or Georgia, do you think, the team to beat heading into the kind of the crunch time of his recruitment?
You know, if I had to name a team to beat, I still lean towards Penn State. You know, today, Josh, he's been there so many times. I think double-digit visits to Happy Valley. He's been to Georgia just once. Obviously, that one visit earlier this year made a strong impression, left them in the Final Four, and really, I think, competing for that top spot with Penn State heading into these final trips. But if I had to lean one way, just because of comfortability, closer to home, he's more familiar. I go Penn State, but it's super close with them in Georgia. I mean, Mike Bobo, what they've done as a program the last few years, definitely have his attention.
All right. Now, the next big development that happened over the weekend was five-star offensive tackle David Sanders announcing a top six that includes South Carolina, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Tennessee, and Clemson. Now, we know that he has some level of interest in all these teams. That's obvious. But, Chad, tell me, who do you put in tier one of this recruitment of David Sanders?
Yeah, I think we've hit on him before he even put this list out, Josh, and I felt the three schools that were up there were Clemson, Georgia, and Tennessee. And I really think it's Clemson, Georgia, then Tennessee. But in that top tier, I think those three have some separation from what was it, Alabama, Ohio State, and South Carolina. All those schools have given him a lot to think about. They've all, not just these six, but schools across the country have made him a priority and a top guy. He's an elite offensive tackle, has a bright future, a lot of upside there at that position, a key position. But I think if there's three schools, Clemson and Georgia, I think are right there, maybe edge over Tennessee heading into the spring. But Tennessee's in that top group as well.
Yeah, Clemson has done a great job building that relationship with David Sanders. I want to talk about another five-star in the South, and that's defensive lineman Elijah Griffin. Over the weekend, he named a top 12, not quite the top 6 that David Sanders announced. So how do you interpret Elijah Griffin's top 12? Because really, I mean, it feels like he's a Georgia lean. So if anybody in this top 12 is going to give Georgia a run, who are you looking at?
Yeah, top 12, that's a large number, but he's a large guy and a number 2 prospect in the country for us on 300, and he's an elite talent. I mean, he's been coveted since, Georgia offered him before he even started high school, and I think that's really what set Georgia apart. Obviously, the early offer, relationships, he knows players there. He's from the state of Georgia. He's down the coast in Savannah. He's been there over a dozen times. Trey Scott, Kirby Smart, the whole staff, really the people know not just Elijah, but his family as well. And I think that really plays into what you said, him being a Georgia lean, Josh. And I think if there is competition there, as of right now, look, he has a trip to Miami coming up this week. He'll be at US later this month, all first-time visits for. Elijah Griffin. But I think if there's two to watch as competition to Georgia, it'd be Clemson and South Carolina. Two schools relatively close to home, be on that Georgia coast. Easy to get to Clemson. Been there I think 4 times. Columbia around 8 or 9 times. So very comfortable there. He'll probably take OVs to Clemson, Georgia, South Carolina. We'll see how the others kind of play out. But he's in no rush to make a decision. But I think right now Georgia has a pretty sizable lead in this race.
All right. Now, DJ Pickett, another 5-star prospect that we got to hit on, he talked to you over the weekend, and he kind of tipped his hand on what his plan is, and this was what he told you, quote, "The plan now is to be patient. I'll take a couple of visits this spring, the 4 official visits in June, then a couple early in the season, and I'm going to commit on October 6th, so a mid-season commitment." What are your sources saying on the DJ Pickett recruitment as we head into the spring months?
Like we always say, Josh, follow the visits, right? He went to LSU, obviously in January. The buzz coming off that trip was extremely high for the Tigers in Baton Rouge, and it still is. Maybe not quite as strong as it was a month and a half ago, but he's going back to Baton Rouge this weekend. He has an OV lined up to LSU. I still like where LSU sits in this race. Maybe not as commanding of a lead based on buzz and kind of feedback from sources as it was maybe mid-January after that first visit, but they're still extremely high on his list. I think out of the 6 schools he mentioned to me, we talked about LSU, Oregon, Miami, Georgia, Florida, and Florida State. I think there's some separation there. He went to Oregon after he visited LSU in January. He'll take an OV back to Eugene. It'll be his 3rd trip there to Oregon across the country when it comes that time in June. Then you have Miami, the legacy school. His uncle played there. His cousin Booker Pickett just signed there this past cycle. So connections there to Miami as well. I think LSU, Miami, and Oregon have some separation from that pack. He wants to take some trips maybe to Florida and Florida State during the season, see how their teams look, how they're playing, and then look to make that decision early in the fall.
All right. So we got some time on DJ Pickett, but appreciate you laying that out. All right. One more 5-star we're going to hit on, and then we're going to get out of here. 5-star wide receiver Caleb Cunningham out of Mississippi is set to hit the road this week because today the dead period ends. So we know this week that he's going to visit Alabama and Ole Miss. But the number 2 wide receiver in America is currently trending heavily toward Mississippi State on the recruiting prediction machine. What's your read on this recruitment of Caleb Cunningham? Do you think right now Mississippi State is the team to beat for the number 2 ranked wide receiver?
I do, Josh. I think if tomorrow was signing day, I think he signs with Mississippi State. I think he's headed off really well with the new staff, not just the head coach, Steph Levy, but really the staff. And him, keeping Chad Bumpus was a big thing to keep that connection at the wide receiver room to Caleb Cunningham. And look, people that know Caleb know he is a homebody. He's a family guy, extremely close with his mom. From where he's at in high school to Starkville, Mississippi, half an hour drive. Easy to get to. Family can get there. Family can see him play. He can visit anytime he wants to, basically, just right up the road. So I think a lot of things factor in to not just me, but other insiders feeling good about Mississippi State's position right now. But there are other programs. I think he's visiting, 10, 11, 12 schools probably this spring. He may add a few more in the summer. So still a ways to go in this race. And he's in no rush to make a decision. But I think Levy and that program in Starkville are the one all the others are chasing right now.
All right. Well, Chad Simmons, appreciate the Monday morning check-in, hitting on a couple of these elite 5-stars. Appreciate you, Chad.
Anytime. Thanks, Josh.
The first 2025 commitment of the Kalen DeBoer era happened over the weekend, and there's no better way to do it than flipping one from the Auburn Tigers. Antonio Coleman. He should be a familiar name to Bama fans because Coleman flipped his commitment from Alabama to Auburn on December 22nd. He decided to run it back with a flip from the Tigers over the weekend and return to the Crimson Tide's 2025 class, which he announced on Saturday. This also put Bama into the top 10, currently sitting at number 9 overall in 2025. Bama was outside the top 25 back in January, but here we are back where Alabama fans belong in that top 10. And today, I got the great Tim Watts on this video to talk some Bama recruiting. But first, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, lock into the channel, because we're bringing it all off season. All right, let's bring on Tim Watts from Bama Online. And like I said, very rare to see one of these recruits flip back to the team that he was committed to after a flip away from that team. How was Kalen DeBoer able to pull this off and get Antonio Coleman back on board Saturday?
I think a big part was Freddie Roach, right? He was the one that recruited him to Alabama. He's had a relationship with him for multiple years. He was a stayover from the Saban staff to the Kalen DeBoer staff. I think he needs huge credit for, also that's not his area, but that's his position. So obviously a really good relationship there. And I also think Kane Womack, coming from South Alabama, had a good relationship, knew the kids at Saraland, has probably known Antonio Coleman just as long as Freddie Roach. So I think both of those things worked in the favor. And also, talking to people close to him, Alabama's where he wanted to be. I mean, there was definitely some confusion when you look back at the time he flipped, but that was almost like a different era, right? You had Ryan Williams, all the rumors he was going to Auburn, fake rumors that, as Ryan has confirmed, were never even close to true. But Ryan, there was a lot of talk about Ryan possibly going to Auburn. I think that played into him. His decision a little bit, and also Lacy, who is committed to Texas, and was looking at Auburn. So maybe he just got caught up in the moment. But talking to people, Alabama's where he wanted to be, and I think at the end of the day, Alabama just did a better job recruiting as far as building relationship. And also, Auburn lost their defensive line coach. Yeah. And as we know, outside of the NIL, recruiting is relationships. So those things still matter. I don't care about the NIL or anything else. Relationships still matter.
Yeah, and Bama is turning that recruiting focus in-state under Kalen DeBoer, really building this foundation of the 2025 class with Alabama prospects. The in-state focus includes defensive lineman Antonio Coleman, who we just spoke about from Saraland, Alabama, running back commitment Anthony Rogers, he's from Pike Road, Alabama, and Miles Johnson, three-star linebacker commitment from Bruton, Alabama. So I wanted to ask you, who's next in-state? I got a couple names I want to ask you about. We'll start with edge Zion Grady, because he was once in this class from Troy, Alabama, the elite edge, four-star recruit, decommitted when Nick Saban retired. What's the latest on Zion Grady? I know he's looking at Georgia. I know he's taking some other visits as well, but what about Alabama?
I think Alabama's in the mix. They're still recruiting him, still evaluating him. That's one thing that's kind of interesting. I think most people, your average fan, doesn't realize is that Kalen DeBoer's staff might not like some of the guys that Nick Saban's liked, and Kalen DeBoer's staff might like some that Saban didn't. So there's going to be a different philosophy. It'll be along the same lines when it comes to recruiting, but you're fitting for a different system, right? You're fitting different offense and different defense. So there's a lot of evaluation still going on. Zion's certainly a guy, like you said, committed to Alabama and certainly has been on Alabama's radar for some time.
All right, let's head over to Birmingham, Alabama, and that's where the nation's #1 ranked corner, Naeem Offord, is. Now, I saw Alabama recently offered his teammate, Timothy Merritt, recently. Was this a play to get Offord back on campus, get him back involved with Alabama, or, are they just trying to recruit his teammate, Timothy Merritt?
No, they like him. I mean, he's got a short sample size, but if you look at his highlight tape, he's fast, he's big, he's got all the physical traits you look for. And the one thing I think this defensive back, with Nick Saban's staff, you had to be really understanding of their defense. There was almost like a test, almost like the ACT, I felt like, on the official visits where you ran through the schemes and everything, because it was so important to pick it up. I think Kane Womack, I think it's going to be a little bit different, where you just want your best athletes lined up against the best wide receiver and let them play. And Merritt fits that bill. I mean, physically, he's extremely gifted. Like I said, he's fast. If you watch his clips, short clips, but he's fast and he's got good size. Bama had him in camp last year and obviously liked him enough to offer him. I don't think it's a play. I've never heard of any package deal with Offord. Offord's going to be able to name his school, obviously committed to Ohio State. And, he's going to get a massive NIL offer when all is said and done, which will factor in. But I don't think they're tied together at all.
All right, let's move on then to safety Anquan Fagin. He's out of Oxford, Alabama. He's another five-star prospect within the state of Alabama. But looking at his recruiting prediction machine totals early on, it shows USC and Georgia out front. Is Alabama going to be able to make a run at Fagin's this spring?
Yeah, I think USC is where his brothers going to school. I think that factored in. pretty early. I mean, George, he's going to have his, another one's going to be able to pick his schools that he wants to. Alabama's had some good success at Thompson High School, so probably a continuation there. I know they like him. Another guy I really like is Derek Smith from the Selma area. He, to me, is one of the elite prospects in the country. Good as you're going to find athletically for a safety. He's got all those tools. Could play both ways, which most of these guys could. But, yeah, Fagins and Smith are going to be two Alabama's looking at heavily.
All right, and we can't talk in-state recruiting without talking about Saraland QB KJ Lacy. Now, I know Alabama's trying to flip Deuce Knight and Julian Lewis, but they just landed Antonio Coleman. They're staying busy at Saraland High School. Are they going to make a serious run at flipping KJ Lacy off of his commitment from Texas?
The thing that's interesting about quarterbacks is all of them are committed. Yeah. I mean, you're recruiting basically all your top guys. You're going to trying to flip somebody. Lacy's on the board. I haven't seen Alabama make a push yet, but it's still early. There's still guys they're looking at. Deuce, I think, is a guy they really like. Everybody likes Juju Lewis. Both of those guys are highly recruited. But I also think that, those dominoes, even though they've fallen, they're probably going to have to fall again a little bit because a lot of those quarterbacks, again, if you're looking for your quarterback, you got to go take him from somebody at this stage. So probably filling out process of seeing how interested they are into you, what's your best options, and, playing the percentages on what you will be able to get and what you won't. So still a lot to be determined at the quarterback position.
All right, a lot going on today at Bama Online. The dead period lifts. Visits are expected to pick up all week. Tim, what is going to be the big visit weekend for Alabama? Or is this just going to be a consistent trickle of big-time names coming in throughout the spring?
Yeah, it's going to be just, we've got a list over there. Andrew Bone, Joseph Hastings do a great job keeping that list updated. And it's a daily visit. The weekends will be easier. Obviously, you got kids in school. It's not as easy just to get up and drive to Tuscaloosa. But on the weekends, it's going to be the busiest. But you're going to have guys trickling in and out just consistently through this spring practice. And honestly, there's a lot of interest and curiosity. They don't know what they're going to see, but a lot of people are excited to see it.
Yeah. And like I said, or like you said, that visitor list just keeps growing and growing. I go to Bama Online almost every morning and new names updated all the time. You guys should go check it out. Tim Watts, appreciate you taking your time on Monday morning to drop by the Inside Scoop.
You got it, guys.
Chad Simmons, director of recruiting, was down in Miami over the weekend because the Under Armour Camp Series made its way to South Florida. And Chad is here bright and early to spill the scoop from the weekend. All right, bring in Chad Simmons. Chad, we are talking intel on top Florida recruits, and we'll start at the top with cornerback Chris Ewal out of Chaminade Madonna High School. Now, we know it's an in-state battle for him. He decommitted from Michigan. They are still recruiting him. But how do you make a read on this? Is Miami right now one of the teams that you consider out in front for Chris Ewald?
I do. I think I said over the weekend, I think he was committed to a Michigan at one time. I like where another sits right now in Miami for Chris Ewald. Obviously, he's a playmaker on the defensive side of the ball over at Chaminade Madonna. They had great success there, last year with Zaquan Patterson, a safety, JoJo Trader, a receiver athlete. Now, they didn't get Jeremiah Smith, and they missed on Cedric Bailey, but he went to NC State. But they're in a good position now, I think, for Ewald. That's the connection there, not just with his position coach. There's been some change there with a guy going to the NFL. Chevis Jackson coming in now to be that DB guy. But the way Crystal Ball does it, I think, really played into this race and why Miami's in a good spot. And the whole staff recruits these players. It's not just position coach, not just defensive guy or offensive guy, but he has the entire staff involved. I think that's what's kind of held this together. And they're a local program. I was told that is not going to let Ewald get away.
All right. Yeah. Last year, they did not land Jeremiah Smith, but they did land Patterson and Trader. So who would you consider the two team in the two spot behind Miami if we're talking this recruitment?
Maybe Florida State. They're in there too, pretty strong. I mean, he's been to Tallahassee. He likes Pat Surtain, obviously from the South Florida area, coach at American Heritage just a few years ago. I think Florida State is definitely on his radar. I mean, he's got an OB to Georgia, an out-of-state school. They've come down. He knew T. Rob from Alabama. His time has always had Georgia on his radar. But I think the one that everybody again is chasing is Miami, with Florida State probably being number 2 right now.
All right, and at the camp that you were at, wide receiver Cortez Mills was the on-3 top performer. He's out of Homestead High School, and like I said, the dead period ends today, so he will be visiting Miami. Are they the favorite here right now for Mills early on?
Yeah, Mills, he's really changed, his story, his narrative. Each time we talk over the last, I've seen him, I think, 3 times in the last maybe 2 months, and at different times, different schools have been mentioned more by him as the key guys in the race. And I'd say a pretty consistent one is Miami, him going back there this weekend. I mean, he's mentioned some out-of-state schools too, but him going to Miami today, obviously that shows him that Miami is not wasting any time getting him back on campus, getting more face time with him. He has a great connection with Kevin Beard. And he really credit, again, the whole staff, not just connecting with him, but his parents, his family, his mom, his dad, and not just recruiting him, but getting to know him as a person. So, yes, he's a Homestead kid down below the University of Miami going towards the Florida Keys. And I think Miami really wants to work hard to keep him home. But some other schools are in the mix. Florida, an in-state school, he likes them a lot. It has an OV there set. Then you got schools like LSU and Clemson, I think, will factor into this race as well. But Miami has positioned themselves well early in March.
All right, now we're going to move on to running back Byron Lewis. He's at American Heritage. Really impressive prospect. 6 foot, 208 pounds. Now, Ohio State is working hard on Lewis, but is he leaning toward maybe an in-state school?
Look, I think at different times, again, here, I would say different schools have been trending, but a consistent name has always been going back. It's like a Miami show. The University of Miami doing a great job there recruiting him. And they've done a good job the last couple of years going against the school you mentioned, like Ohio State. They flipped Mark Fletcher. They flipped Jordan Lyle this last cycle from Ohio State and kept them home. I think Lewis has kind of emerged as that guy in the 305 they want to keep home in South Florida. A lot like a Mark Fletcher, a big back, runs hard downhill. But he's mentioned, Ohio State, Tony Alford, great relationship there. He wants to get back to Columbus soon. He'll be at Florida State and Miami both the month of March. Florida State's coming on strong. They're making this race a little bit tighter, I think, than people thought from a Seminole perspective at one time. And then you have Alabama. They've always been in this. He's been talking to the new staff some as well. So I think those are the 4 schools right now I hear the most about: out of state, Alabama, Ohio State, and then in-state, Florida State and Miami.
All right. Stay at American Heritage High School for safety Gregory Thomas. He goes 6'2", 185 pounds, and he's been trending heavily to Florida State. Can the Noles lock this recruitment down, or does he end up taking spring, summer visits, and maybe another competitor gets involved here?
Yeah, I mean, we'll shift from giving Miami all the love over to Florida State, their big in-state rival. I like where Florida State's at for Gregory Thomas. I mean, I think nobody's recruiting him like Florida State. It's that simple. We talked about Pat Surtain being from American Heritage. He was actually the head coach Thomas's freshman year. As he was coming out, he went to the collegiate game. And so there's a connection to American Heritage, connection to Pat Surtain. And he's mentioned nowhere yet. He hasn't been a lot of places, but nowhere yet has made him feel at home like Florida State, from the staff, the people, just the culture there in Tallahassee. He's been to Miami. They're involved, but he's still kind of really early in getting out to see other places. He wants to see LSU this weekend. He wants to see Penn State maybe in the spring, but there's no doubt about it. Florida State is setting the pace in this race with Gregory Thomas.
Yeah, they're definitely setting the pace, but, like you said, if he gets out on the road, he visits an LSU, he goes to see some of these places, it could get interesting. All right, let's head to the other coast of Florida. Port Charlotte High School is where Myon Charles is at. 6'5", 300-pound defensive lineman, top 150 prospect, and he's trending to Miami, but UF is right there as well. How do you read this battle?
Yeah, UF and Florida State and Miami. All three in-state schools are heavily in the mix. He's been to all three schools numerous times, and each school wants to get him back on campus this spring and hopefully this summer for OVs or even into the fall if he takes it that far as well. But I think right now it's two schools. I think it's Miami and Florida State, and
Really?
according to a source, and even I think Myron himself hinted at it this weekend during some interviews, that FSU may have a slight edge in this recruitment. But Miami, I feel like, and I'm told by someone close, that Miami feels pretty confident they're at least in the top two, if not the favorite and the leader for Myon Charles. But he's been to Florida State a little bit more. He loves Odell Haggins, who has been there, it seems like, 30 plus years, forever at Florida State. He likes the continuity of that staff. He likes what Florida State did on the field this past season, and kind of just the stability he's mentioned to me of the program, where Norvell just signed a new deal to lock him in for a long time at Florida State. But then you have Miami a little closer to home. He'll probably take multiple trips there. And I think right now Florida State and Miami kind of lead the way.
Yeah. All right, we're going to round it out with another defensive lineman. He goes 6'2", 270. I'm talking about Jarquez Carter out of Newberry, Florida. Busy spring with visits coming. Where do things stand with him? Because I know interest is picking up.
Yeah, I think he's somewhere in that 40 offer range. Kind of went from, maybe a quiet name in Newberry, Florida, to a big national name, over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And he's coveted. I think, obviously, he's taking these trips out of state, but I think the first trip starts with in-state school Miami this week. But I think end of the day, he just decides to stay home. So does he go to Miami, to go to Florida State, Florida? He mentions UCF in that group as well. He's been there numerous times. I think if there is a school or two right now I like is Miami and Florida. He's very close to both staffs. There's been some changeover at Florida. But he really loves Napier, direction of the program. Then you have Joe Salave at Miami. He'll be back there this week. He loves Jason Taylor, thinking about, even though he doesn't play the edge position, but just kind of getting the knowledge of an NFL Hall of Famer, Jason Taylor. I think Miami and Florida are the two, but I think when all said and done, he's going to give each in-state school a hard look, including Florida State and UCF, and then make that decision.
All right, Chad. Well, appreciate you dropping by with the Under Armour Camp Series intel. He wrote an insider piece on on3.com. Go check that out. There's about twice as many names as we just covered in there. These, I thought, though, were some of the most important. So, Chad, I know it's early on Monday. You got to go catch a flight back home. Appreciate you stopping by the Inside Scoop today.
Thank you, Josh. Anytime.
Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed that, go check out the hundreds of videos that we have on this channel, and also do me a favor, hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel.